Operation Truth. The show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lou Palumbo. With me, as always, is my co-host, Tom Fuentes. This is Operation Truth. Very simple premise. We intend on telling you the truth independent of politics. Tom and I are both very conservative, but I consider the both of us very open-minded, especially with socially sensitive issues. We're not going to delve into a particular issue at this point, but we're just going to tell you something that I repeatedly remind you of. Please put down your political lens. Step away from what you think is a political affiliation. That's helpful. And just listen to the truth. Unfortunately, the truth will take you in a rather interesting direction. For the past 3.5 years, you have to look at the condition of the country. Independent of these informations that are being disseminated that we're doing much better, I don't know what country they're talking about. And I want to say something to you that I listen to all the time, which is quite an insult to my intelligence, and it should be to yours. That compared to other economies, we're doing so great. I don't care what other countries are doing. I care what this country is doing. The way they phrase that is to intentionally mislead you as to thinking we're doing better than we really are. You know, we have the world's strongest economy. I don't even know if that's true. I don't know what they base that on factually. But what I'm saying to you is that who cares what's going on in other parts of the world? You know, because we're faltering and failing, not as bad as other places, is that supposed to provide us some type of solace? Or I don't understand the purpose of that message. And I'm sick of listening to it redundantly come from the mouth of the president. And I don't mean to be critical or contentious, but I listen to the verbiage, the words. Once again, this is about words. And I listen to the press secretary comparing us to other people. I don't care. I tell my children all the time, I don't care what other people do. I don't care what their parents allow. I know what's right. I know what's wrong. I know what's healthy for you. And I'm guided by that, not by what's going on in other households or other countries. It is so disingenuous to lead this country into thinking that we're on a good path. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a crisis. You can ignore it if you so choose, but you're going to inherit it in the future. Tom is going to get on with me in a second, but I want to continue by saying, as I do almost every podcast, listen to your FBI director reference the southern border of the United States. It's a threat to your national security. We had almost 80,000 people die from fentanyl. They flooded enough fentanyl into this country to kill the population times over. What does it take for this government to understand we have a crisis at the border, other than the fact that we redundantly listen to Mayorkas, Kamala Harris, and the president tell you the border's secure? If you're so stupid as to believe that, do me a favor. Vote for the Democrats in November and see where this country goes in the next 3 or 4 years. The real problem with the Republicans is the giver of the message isn't very popular personally. I remind you of something rather interesting. You bump into a doctor with poor bedside manner. If this guy's the man that can fix your brain or your heart, do you really care what he says in his private life, how he interacts with women in his private life? We're talking about an incident that took place in 2016 about an alleged interaction with a porn star. I really don't care. Much the way I really didn't care what Bill Clinton did in his private life. His bump in the road was he committed perjury over oral copulation sitting in the West Wing of the White House. Didn't offend anybody in the National Organization of Women, known as NOW. There was no outrage. Felony. We're worried about Donald Trump. You know what I say, guys? Let's make this simple. People say to me, how do we fix this? One set of rules universally applied. I don't care what side of the aisle you sit. You have to be held accountable. There has to be consequences. And all these concepts have left the country, period. Just like honor, integrity, and trustworthiness. We're destroying the credibility of every institution, which lends itself to the purpose of this podcast. We're trying to change the conversation and course correct this country for the sake of our children, not for Tom and myself. Anyway, I want to bump into a discussion just very quickly about what's going on in the Middle East, escalation between Iran and Israel. Tom is a former assistant director of the FBI. He oversaw, I believe it was 80 offices across the planet and coordinated their operations, which is quite a feat, but it lends itself to his skill set as far as management goes. Now, Tom may or may not have answers to these questions, but we have hostages being held by Hamas. I want to go to Tom right now and ask you, Tom, does that necessarily lend itself to FBI involvement? And if not, why would that be? And who would have to authorize the FBI to getting involved? Because you and I both know if a U.S. citizen is murdered abroad, please correct me if I'm wrong, the FBI investigates it. Tom?
Yeah, that's correct. And but as far as hostages being taken, it would depend on really the president authorizing it, the attorney general, the director of the FBI, because in this case, hostages being held by a terrorist group in Gaza. Who's controlling Gaza? How do we send the agents into Gaza? How do they establish negotiation, and who with? So that all depends. If you recall the Somali pirates taking hostages, the FBI negotiated by radio hookup through the U.S. Navy to the hostages on the ship, and basically lulled those hostage takers into basically relaxing. And at some point, then Navy snipers took them out from the nearby Navy ship to shoot those guys on the ship that they used, or the lifeboat that they used to hold the hostages. So yeah, the FBI has negotiated for hostage releases all over the world. Back in my time, where many negotiators had traveled to the Philippines, to South America, to Africa, to various countries to do it. Whether they're doing that in this case, I don't know. I don't know if the Israelis would let the FBI come in there and negotiate when theoretically they have their own negotiators. And then where are the people they would negotiate with? Hamas leaders that are in Qatar, living fat, dumb, and happy there, or Hamas leaders on the ground in Gaza, who Israel keeps claiming that they're killing them left and right. Who's in charge? Who would they negotiate with? So these are a number of issues that would have to be established. Could the FBI be negotiating? Absolutely. Are they? I don't know.
So the question I then pose to you, Tom, in your experiences overseeing international operations, which would lend itself exactly to what we're talking about, is it irregular, in your opinion, that they would not be intimately involved in this, collaborating with other branches of government, for example? Would it be irregular? Or should, in your opinion, Tom, this is a lot maybe opinion-driven or even professionally backgrounded, but is it your opinion that they should be intimately involved with this whole negotiation with the Hamas and the holding of our hostages?
Well, given our negotiators, or the FBI's negotiators' success over many, many years around the world, my opinion, yeah, I would hope they're involved, and they should be involved. Whether they are, I don't know. And there are a lot of political circumstances that determine whether they get involved and who they're going to negotiate with and what are the terms of the negotiation. Now, this might be a situation where the Israeli IDF won't want outside negotiators coming in, because they'll do the deal with Hamas if there's going to be a deal. And we don't know to what extent the Israelis even want the negotiators rescued. They like having them out there being held so that they have an excuse to wipe out Gaza.
Very interesting concept, Tom. That's a very good point you just made. Maybe it lends itself to Israel's agenda, so to speak. I want to ask you something else, Tom. Many of us who are in law enforcement by background are aware that the FBI has a hostage rescue team. They have a SWAT unit. If they were involved, and this is just open-ended question, if they were involved, hypothetically involved, in negotiating with the Hamas, for example, and release of hostages that belong to the United States, would they insert a tactical unit, or would they defer, say, to a SEAL team or a Delta team? What do you think about that, Tom? Just curious.
I don't think there's going to be any of those teams put in there unless the Israeli IDF want them to come in or supplement their tactical ability to do it. The last thing Israel wants is for the U.S. to step in and solve this problem and free the hostages and show them to be inferior in their capability to free the hostages. And we're going on 9 or 10 months of these hostages being held, and we don't know of. not only do we not know if there's progress been made, we don't know who they're going to go, if there is negotiations on anybody's part, Israeli or American.
So I want to ask you this question, Tom, and this may be opinion generated. In light of the fact that Hamas has decided to hold U.S. citizens for 9 or 10 months, as you pointed out, why wouldn't our military be more actively involved in addressing Hamas, if not for the sole purpose of retrieving our hostages, but just in support of Israel in general? Because we both know we started to fund this war. We're providing them Patriot systems and missile defense systems and arming them in various capacities. And they've had our aircraft forever. I mean, they're flying our aircraft. They're trained by our pilots. We're giving them parts so they can repair, which is something that isn't commonly done with other nations who acquire our military hardware like F-16s or whatever. But, Tom, what about the fact that they're holding our hostages? Why aren't we exerting more of a military presence in an attempt to, and I know what you're going to say next, Israel doesn't want it because of their agenda, but I would say from our perspective.
Well, I'm saying we don't know. I don't know if Israel wants it or not. I'm speculating that normally, they're highly trained and highly capable, and they may not want it. And we don't know is Israel's real true agenda here, which is basically, is it to wipe out the population of Gaza, like some Israelis have said? Or, in which case they need hostages to still be hostages, or there's no justification to do it. The other part of this is it's going to have to be, especially military involvement, it's going to have to be White House approved. And the White House, knowing all the accusations against Netanyahu being charged with war crimes, is the Biden White House or the Kamala Harris White House or whoever's running the place, are they going to be apt to have American military or civilian authorities get involved in this, potentially being also accused of war crimes or participating with Israel in what has been called war crimes all over the world?
I'm sure
that's a political. All of these are political. You say you don't want to get political. They're all political questions.
I agree. And I think it's helpful for the public to hear that message from you, Tom, so they understand the scope of this problem. It's not black and white. It's a little convoluted. It's a little more complex than the government would like you to know. I want to ask you this, Tom. I don't know if you...
Which actually begs the question, what does the government want you to know? We're positive that we've been spoon-fed many lies from the American government and from the Israeli government. So who do you believe? Who do we know that we can trust?
I think that goes back to my opening statement that we've destroyed the credibility with every institution in this country, tragically, and it's important.
And that's the price you pay when you do destroy the credibility. You need certain agencies to have absolute credibility like the FBI used to have and doesn't now. So that's the price you pay for lying, or fooling the public, or shadowing, keeping facts from the public and having people go to the podium in the White House. Oh, this is the situation, and then lie through their teeth. That's the problem.
My own personal opinion is that, we're knocking on heaven's door in the Middle East right now, because I listened to, I can't remember if it was a current or former Israeli official addressing a nuclear reactor going online in Iran, and he didn't equivocate when he said they will attack it. And guys, that would clearly be a real stern point of escalation. I don't know what the long game is on this at this point. I do think at this point it would be helpful if we had leadership in our country that Iran and other adversaries feared. I don't sense that is the case, because I'm watching, two proxy wars right now. We're watching what's going on in Taiwan. We're watching what's going on in our borders, and all of these lend itself on some form to our national security. I'm just wondering what the next move would be if a nuclear reactor in Iran went online and Israel went after it. It would be quite interesting, I suspect. And right now, as we both understand it, I'm sure, Israel's fighting this war on two fronts, its northern and its southern border. And right now we're in, I guess it's probably commonly known that in Lebanon, the State Department has basically informed all U.S. citizens that they need to figure out how to leave Lebanon and probably the country in totality. Just this is not going to have a happy ending, I suspect. And all of the rhetoric you hear, from the White House about telling Netanyahu about a ceasefire and hostage exchange, I think people are really having a hard time understanding the Israelis, and they've been consistent through generations. If you cross their bow with your agenda and it's not consistent with their preservation, you're going to have a problem with them, and they really don't care what other people think or say. It's quite interesting. And what's also important to be mindful of, and we bring this up in other podcasts, Israel's survival is predicated on support from this country, kind of like Zelensky, which we're going to bump into in a minute because we're continuing to arm and fund him. And I want to go into that right now, Tom. So as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I've learned that we're supplying F-16s to the Ukraine. Tom, you hear anything about that?
Oh yeah, that's the plan. We're gonna send F-16s, but military people in the know about Russia's capability are saying that they'll be blown up immediately. They won't be able to fly missions. They'll be lucky to land in Ukraine on Ukrainian bases from which to take off from, and that probably they won't last very long and be in a position to attack Russia anyway. So that's the big question of how far they'll get with F-16 deployment.
Yeah, and the other question I have quite simply is, if you have an F-16 in the Ukraine, is it your intention to deploy that in the Ukraine? I would think, if we were going to use an F-16, it would be to attack Russia in Russia. And clearly that could be deemed as an act of war because we're already funding this thing to a ridiculous extent to the tune of $174 billion and counting. But we're now supplying them munitions, those of which being used in Russia could really turn us in a different direction.
That's already happening, Lou. We gave them missiles capable of firing into Russia months ago. And initially, Biden said, oh, no, we're not authorizing the Ukraine to fire missiles into Russia. And then a short time later, he said, okay, now we are. Now, I don't know what stage of cognitive ability Biden was, but these are recent statements in the last 2 months, let's say, where Biden has given the green light to Ukraine to send their missiles into Russia. Now, Russia has said that's a red line. You would think it would be a red line. We wouldn't allow missiles to come into the United States. And especially because they're targeting civilian areas, so they're killing civilians. So at some point, Russia keeps drawing these red lines. Don't do this, don't go there. And now sending in jets. At some point, Russia's going to say, okay, we've warned you about 50 times. Don't do these things. You do them anyway. So it might just be time that there's retribution on the part of Russia.
What do you think the likelihood is, Tom? And just your opinion, of course. This is just an opinion, guys. We're not trying to tell you factually this is something that will happen. What do you think the possibility is that Putin would stage a tactical nuclear strike in the Ukraine? What would have to happen to precipitate that?
Well, he's already said several scenarios that if he perceives a direct threat to Russia, and these missiles and F-16s may be exactly that if they see that it's that huge of a threat, they reserve the right to launch at least tactical nuclear weapons at whatever place they need to, whether it's blowing up an airport in Ukraine or energy facilities or command and control facilities, whatever it might be. He's already said he might do that. We keep assuming he's bluffing. Well, we'll see if he keeps bluffing.
I don't know if Russia is in possession of this type of weapon that we clearly are, that we did deploy in the Middle East. It's called a Moab. They call it the mother of all bombs. It isn't a tactical nuclear device, but it's quite destructive. And do you happen to know, Tom, you may have the answer to this question, you may not. I don't expect you to be 100% up to date on what Russia's capability is, although it wouldn't surprise me, to be honest with you. Do you think they have a device of that nature, something prior to the deployment of a tactical nuclear device? What do you think, Tom?
I think if they don't need it. They're already sending, hypersonic missiles into Ukraine and blowing up command and control facilities. And it's been reported that at those facilities are NATO officials, including Americans. That our country will not admit that we have Americans dying in Ukraine. We just won't admit it. So whether they're not bringing them into Dover Air Force Base in coffins, how they're getting them here, don't know. But so don't know.
What level of certitude do you have, Tom, that that's actually happening? What do you support that with?
Well, just recently it was reported that within the last couple of weeks, the Russians sent a hypersonic missile into a NATO command and control facility in Western Ukraine, and that included French and Germans and Polish and Americans. Now, that was reported in the media. How much stock you can put in that, I don't know. But many military analysts on YouTube channels have said that, yeah, we probably already have American casualties there that are not being reported. And secondly, if we send in F-16s or more tanks, that requires technical ability to service them, to fix them. And the mechanics going in, they may put on jumpsuits that are, not showing U.S. citizenship, but it's going to be American mechanics that keep those F-16s functioning, period. Not going to be Ukrainians, not going to be anybody else. It's going to be our mechanics that have to go with those jets to keep them in the air. The problem is we're lucky to keep our own jets here in the air. They take a lot of maintenance. They're very highly technical, and we're not likely to give that technical capability to the Ukrainians, who might turn around and then surrender and give it to the Russians. So really, it's going to be Americans that keep those planes functioning.
It's interesting. If you listen to Donald Trump, and I'm not promoting Donald Trump, I'm just repeating something he said in reference to both the war in the Middle East and the Ukraine. He said he would probably be able to end them before he got in office, which wouldn't surprise me because it's what Reagan did during the hostage situation in Iran during the Carter administration. But to tell you, there is a simplistic nature attached to that statement, which is why I think it could be carried out. The reality of the situation is, if we take the funding and munitions from the Ukraine, they wouldn't last another 30 minutes with Russia. I'm going to have Tom comment on that in a minute, number one. So you sit down with Zelensky and say, guess what? Now you have to negotiate and compromise here because, the golden goose is just left and we're gone. That's it. We're not funding. We're not pouring any more billions of dollars into the Ukraine so you can perpetuate this war and justify your existence and continue to hold office, because apparently all elections have been suspended, as well as the oppression of anybody that doesn't speak in alignment with him, be it the church or media. And then go to Putin and say, listen, you bloodied their nose. We got the memo. Give back a little of this territory. You can keep a certain amount of it. And I'll tell you something else, Tom, and I'd like you to comment on this. I've heard from individuals that there are a lot of people that are Ukrainian or live in the Ukraine that are more loyal to Russia than they are to Ukraine. So there's something to be said about that. And I don't know exactly what that would translate to in the end game, just part of a conversation. What have you heard about that, Tom?
Well, yeah, it's obviously been known a long time that the eastern part of Ukraine that opted to join Russia, they're mostly Russians in the Donbass region, and they've been persecuted by the Ukrainian military. And ironically, the groups within the Ukrainian military are Nazis. So the Nazis have been attacking Russian civilians in those areas. And Putin had said a while back, you've got to stop that. We're not going to keep allowing that. So that's one of the justifications Putin had to go in. Secondly, he hasn't taken over Odessa and Kharkov that are traditionally Russian cities. Odessa was never a Ukrainian city. It goes back to Russia hundreds of years. So as does Crimea when Putin took Crimea in 2014. So a lot of those issues have been a long time issues. And when Ukraine was generally peaceful with Russia and it had agreed to stay neutral and not join NATO, that was fine. Then all of a sudden you've got Ukraine on the verge of becoming a NATO nation. And that means U.S. weapons that we give to NATO and Germany and Poland everywhere, those weapons are going to be on the Moscow track. They're going to be on the Russian border and can launch missiles into Moscow or other military facilities in Western Russia. And those missiles will get there in 8 to 10 minutes. So Putin has already said that's one of the key issues. And before Russia even went into Ukraine, Zelensky and negotiators from Russia had agreed that Ukraine would stay neutral. And that pretty much neutralized any need for Russia to go in there and make sure that Ukraine stays neutral. However, shortly after that agreement 2 years ago, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of Great Britain, flies to Kiev, tells Zelensky, no deals with Russia. We'll give you everything you need to fight a war with Russia, to invade, to depose Putin, but you're not going to agree to that. You're not going to agree to stay out of NATO. And since then, you've had people, even Kamala Harris went to some conference in Europe and said, we want NATO to put Ukraine on the fast track to be part of NATO. And that's been a sticking point from the beginning. Putin has made it clear they will not be part of NATO under any circumstances.
Yeah, and for people that do not understand, that's the same concept we would embrace. Going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Russians were attempting to install missiles on Cuba's mainland, which were 90 miles off our coast, and almost precipitated a world war. So, we're not supporting Putin. We're not Putin supporters. We're just merely explaining to you the logic and the rationale that applies here. The other thing I find odd is that suddenly, the Ukraine is our best buddy or they're our friend and ally. This is a country, excuse my expression, we wouldn't have pissed on if they were on fire because of how rampant corruption was, both in government and this infamous company called Burisma that Hunter Biden was involved in. I find this rather entertaining that suddenly we're taking up the cause of an organization, a country and an organization that we would never have ever been in alignment with before. And I hate to break it to everybody, but the Ukraine is nothing like Italy or Germany or France or Sweden or in Finland or Denmark or the UK. It's not that type of country. It's an oppressive country. It's a corrupt country. And I'm not saying that what Putin did wasn't correct, but I do want to remind you of something and this is factually driven. This isn't something that's conjecture, speculation, in my opinion. The current president, made a comment that a mild incursion into Ukraine by Putin could be tolerated. Did anyone ever consider that may have precipitated this and given Putin the green light, compounded by the fact that he looks at Biden and Biden doesn't know which way to turn? It's absolutely incredible what we're living today. Guys, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. This is Operation Truth. You can reach us at operationtruthofficial.com. We're not looking for you to agree with everything we say. We would like to hear you retort. We're not trying to spoon feed you. We're trying to give you food for thought. That's what this is about. And we're trying to course correct the thinking here. Unfortunately, we're at a really interesting crossroad in the history of this country. I don't think we've ever been more divided. Half the country is in favor of this Democrat platform. I guess I can't understand why, because of how obviously detrimental it is to the safety of the country and the future of our children. And the other half are just blindly following Donald Trump. And even though Donald Trump doesn't have the bedside manner, I would say he has the resolve, and he's got chops, this guy. All you have to do is take a look at that assassination attempt. Most sane, rational, reasonable people would have been ducking for cover. This guy stood in defiance. I don't know what to say. We're going to be right back, guys. This Operation Truth. Just stick with us. We're going to discuss this border issue with Tom, and I'm going to touch into this gun control issue should time allow. We'll be right back, guys. Stay with us.
Thank you for tuning in to Operation Truth. We are just taking a moment to remind you to go follow us at Operation Truth Official on TikTok. You can also find us at Operation Truth Official on Facebook and Instagram. Be a part of this conversation and join the operation.
We were going to transition to this discussion of the border, but during the break, Tom brought up something that's very interesting and I think worth mentioning and just finalizing our discussion with the Ukraine today. Tom, where's the fly in the ointment for the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship? Why are we so married?
Well, the we is Joe Biden, because when Biden was vice president, he took tens of millions of dollars from the Ukrainians. They have the ability to produce that evidence, the wire transfers and all of that, of the money that went to the Biden crime family, including about 20 LLCs controlled by Biden's. And that's why I think that's what happens in political corruption, by the way. I worked, when I was in charge of the FBI's organized crime program for many years, a cornerstone of that program is the gangsters have to bribe public officials, whether it's judges, policemen, corporate officials, whoever it might be. They rely heavily on bribery to get what they want and maintain what they want, to be able to hold that over the heads of the people that they've given money to. Now, in this case, you have the Ukrainians that have given millions of dollars through Burisma to Hunter Biden or other transfers to the LLCs controlled by Joe Biden, which is about 20 of them, that they've transferred millions of dollars into the pockets of Biden, his family, his grandchildren, you name it. And they own him. That's what happens with corruption. So when Zelensky says, I want XYZ, Biden immediately looks to give them XYZ. And then they throw into they add to the propaganda from our administration. Oh, he's the George Washington of the Ukraine. He's a hero. He's nothing of the kind. Ukraine has been a corrupt a country for many, many years. And Zelensky himself, he's so democratic. He locked up as a political appointment who is now serving a 10-year jail sentence in the Ukraine. Sound familiar? Like the lawfare against Donald Trump. He's locked up members of the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, priests, nuns, others, closed down some of the churches. That's very Marxist. Many dictators do exactly that because they don't want somebody going to the pulpit and saying how evil they are. Then he's locked up journalists and shut down newspapers and magazines that disagreed with him, or TV or radio stations. So you have all of this activity, which under normal circumstances, we would say that's tyranny. It's a dictatorship in the Ukraine. It's horrible. They're highly corrupt. Oh, no. We've got this media carrying water for the Democrats saying, oh, he's the George Washington. Let's put a Ukrainian pin on our lapel. Let's wave their flag. Let's do all of that. And it's based on corruption. It's like corruption 101. I think 20 years from now, when they teach public corruption, political corruption at the FBI Academy or any law enforcement academy, this is going to be the textbook case that they show. What happened in the Ukraine, compromising at the time our Vice President Joe Biden, his family, and then later Biden himself.
Guys, as you can tell, Tom is fairly well versed and very attached to this because his whole life has been built on honor and integrity and protecting this country. And he knows thereof what he speaks. I do want to close the show, but I want to tell you something that you might get a kick out of. Nancy Pelosi, in the past few days, suggested that Joe Biden's face be added to Mount Rushmore. I don't even know how to respond to that, except we're losing our minds here. I don't want to say anything disparaging about Nancy Pelosi, but she should be ashamed of herself. I don't even know what planet this woman's living on. You want to put two people's faces, you want to emboss their faces on Mount Rushmore, try John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, who were probably the two quintessential leaders of my lifetime post-World War II. And we've had some very good presidents in office. I don't know what you think about the condition of this country, but you need to take a good, hard, objective assessment and understand we're on a collision course right now. Guys, we're going to close for today. When we come back, next show, we're going to try to talk about the borders again, this gun control issue. And I don't want to get off onto the Secret Service because I'm not getting on that bandwagon of bashing them. But I did read something recently, Tom, and I don't know if you read this, but there was a pipe bomb approximately, or let me say it this way, in proximity of Kamala's motorcade. I don't know if you heard that, Tom. We come back next episode, we're going to talk about that. We're going to close for now, guys. This has been Operation Truth. Tom, I thank you as always for your wisdom and your insight. I do want to get Tom, hopefully sooner rather than later, talking again about this Kennedy assassination, because there's a very strong relevance to what we're living today, this military industrial complex, the loss of innocence of our country. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next episode.